The fluorescent lights buzzed mercilessly in the sterile corridors of Willowbrook Senior Care, casting harsh shadows across peeling linoleum floors. It was 3:47 a.m. on October 12, 2019, and the night shift moved with practiced quiet through dimly lit hallways. In room 237, an elderly man sat hunched over a worn notebook, his arthritic fingers tracing mathematical equations with the precision of muscle memory that refused to fade. Meanwhile, 300 miles away at Johnson Space Center in Houston, alarms screamed through mission control. Red warning lights bathed the room in crimson panic as flight controllers shouted over each other, their voices cracking with desperation. The Artemis 7 lunar mission, carrying 4 astronauts and humanity's most advanced deep space technology, was spiraling toward catastrophic failure. Telemetry data cascaded across dozens of monitors, painting a picture of imminent disaster. Oxygen levels were dropping. Navigation systems had gone dark. Communication was fragmenting into static. "We're losing them." Flight Director Sarah Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "All backup systems are failing simultaneously. This is impossible." Back at Willowbrook, the old man's pencil stopped moving. His clouded eyes suddenly sharpened with an alertness that hadn't been seen in months. The nurses had dismissed him as another victim of advancing dementia, a harmless grandfather who mumbled about trajectory calculations and orbital mechanics during his lucid moments. They smiled politely when he claimed to have worked with rockets, attributing his fantasies to a mind retreating into comfortable delusions. But as he stared at the equations covering his notebook's pages, complex formulas that would make MIT professors weep, something profound stirred within him. His weathered hand reached for the emergency phone beside his bed, and for the first time in 2 years, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of a man who had once held the power to move mountains and command the stars. The memories came flooding back like a dam bursting under pressure. Marcus Holloway, though no one at Willowbrook knew his real name, closed his eyes and felt himself transported back to 1969. He was 32 then, brilliant and unbreakable, standing in the same mission control room where chaos now reigned. As deputy flight director for Apollo 11, he had been the youngest person ever to hold such authority, his mind a supercomputer wrapped in flesh and bone. The flashback hit him with visceral intensity, the suffocating tension of July 20, 1969, when Neil Armstrong's voice crackled through static, "Houston, we have a problem." The Eagle's guidance computer was overloading, alarms screaming, fuel running dangerously low. While veteran controllers froze in terror, young Marcus had seen the solution in seconds, a rapid recalculation of descent trajectory that saved the mission and changed history. But that triumph had come at a devastating personal cost. His wife Sarah had been 8 months pregnant, alone in their Houston home, going into premature labor while Marcus chose the moon landing over rushing to her bedside. Their son David was born that historic night, but complications arose. Complications that might have been prevented if Marcus had been there instead of playing hero to the world. Sarah never forgave him. The marriage crumbled within 2 years, and David grew up resenting a father who loved rockets more than family. The weight of that choice had haunted Marcus through 3 decades of increasingly classified work. After Apollo, he'd been recruited by a joint NASA-CIA program developing orbital weapons platforms during the height of the Cold War. Project Skyfall was so secret that officially, it never existed. Marcus designed guidance systems for satellites that could deliver surgical strikes anywhere on Earth, his mathematical genius weaponized for national security. But in 1983, everything changed. During a routine test, one of his satellites malfunctioned, nearly triggering World War III when Soviet radar detected what appeared to be an incoming American first strike. Only Marcus's quick thinking and a direct hotline call to the Kremlin prevented nuclear annihilation. The incident was buried so deep that even presidents weren't briefed on it, but the psychological trauma shattered Marcus completely. He discovered that his own calculations, his life's work, had been subtly sabotaged by his closest colleague and friend, Dr. Elena Vasquez. She had been selling American space secrets to the Soviets for years, using their friendship as cover. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Elena had been David's godmother, had comforted Marcus through his divorce, had been the one person he trusted unconditionally. Call to action. If you're watching this incredible story unfold, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Are you in the same Houston where this drama is taking place? Or somewhere completely different? We love connecting with our global audience. The confrontation with Elena had taken place in an abandoned aircraft hangar outside Langley. She stood there in her elegant suit, tears streaming down her face, a loaded pistol trembling in her hands. "You don't understand the pressure, Marcus," she'd whispered. "They had my sister. My nieces. I had no choice." But Marcus understood pressure better than anyone. He'd lived with impossible choices his entire career. As sirens wailed in the distance and FBI agents surrounded the building, he made one final calculation, not mathematical, but human. Instead of condemning Elena, he covered for her, falsifying records to make it appear she'd been feeding the Soviets useless information while actually protecting American secrets. It was a lie that would consume him for decades. The government buried Marcus after that incident. Officially, he died in a car accident in 1984. In reality, he was relocated under a new identity, his genius deemed too dangerous for any nation to possess. They gave him a comfortable pension, a quiet life in suburban anonymity, and a promise that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. But promises, Marcus learned, were as fragile as rocket fuel tanks. His handler died in 1995. Files were lost, digitized, corrupted, lost again. By 2010, when early-stage Alzheimer's began clouding his mind, no one in government remembered Dr. Marcus Holloway or his decades of service. His son David, now a successful architect in Portland, believed his father was just another elderly man slowly losing his memories to disease. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The man who had saved the world multiple times was now invisible to it, reduced to a shuffling figure in hospital gowns, dismissed by nursing staff who saw only confusion where once there had been cosmic clarity. But tonight, as alarms screamed through his emergency phone from Mission Control, the fog in his mind cleared like morning mist burned away by dawn. His trembling fingers dialed a number that hadn't been used in 15 years, a direct line to NASA's Emergency Command Authority. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. "Emergency Command, this is Director Chen." "Sarah," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "This is Apollo." Sarah Chen's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Apollo was a code name that existed only in the most classified archives, a ghost from an era when the Cold War burned hottest and America's space program carried secrets that could topple governments. Her grandfather had whispered stories about a legendary figure called Apollo, a mathematical genius who'd vanished from NASA's halls decades ago, taking with him knowledge that no computer could replicate. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed into her headset, even as her hands automatically began inputting override codes to isolate the transmission. Around her, Mission Control continued its frantic dance of failure, but she felt suspended in a bubble of disbelief. Apollo died in 1984. The voice on the other end carried a patience born of having lived through humanity's greatest triumphs and most terrible secrets. "Check the telemetry cascade pattern, Sarah. The guidance computers aren't failing, they're being systematically corrupted by a viral algorithm designed to trigger during deep space operations. Look at subsection 7 of the navigation matrix." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard with desperate precision. What she found made her stomach drop through the floor. Hidden in lines of code that should have been routine navigation adjustments was an elegant piece of digital sabotage. A virus so sophisticated that it would have taken months to detect through conventional analysis. But Marcus had seen it in seconds, recognizing patterns that spoke to something deeper than technical expertise. At Willowbrook Senior Care, night nurse Jenny Martinez stood frozen outside room 237, her master key trembling in her hand. She'd been about to check on the confused old man who always talked about rockets, but the voice emanating from his room carried an authority that made her spine straighten involuntarily. This wasn't the gentle, rambling grandfather she'd been caring for. This was someone else entirely. "Sir," she whispered, cracking the door open. "Sir, visiting hours are..." Marcus turned toward her and Jenny gasped. The clouded confusion that usually filmed his eyes had vanished, replaced by a clarity so intense it seemed to burn. "Jenny, I need you to listen very carefully. In 3 minutes, black SUVs are going to arrive at this facility. The men inside will have badges from agencies you've never heard of. You're going to let them in, and you're going to pretend this conversation never happened." "I don't understand, Mr. Holloway. You're scaring me." "My name isn't Holloway," Marcus said gently, his voice carrying the weight of decades of deception. "And right now, 4 astronauts are going to die unless I can save them. Just like I've been saving people for 50 years. Back in Houston, the situation was deteriorating by the second. Artemis 7's life support systems showed 18 minutes of oxygen remaining. Emergency protocols demanded an immediate abort, but the return trajectory calculations were failing catastrophically. Every computer model showed the crew capsule burning up in Earth's atmosphere. Sarah's second-in-command, a brilliant young engineer named David Park, burst into her private communication booth. "Director, we need to evacuate the control room. If this is a cyber attack, they might target our ground systems next." But Sarah was transfixed by the data streams flowing across her secondary monitor. The mysterious Apollo was somehow accessing NASA's most secure networks, not through hacking but through administrative permissions that should have expired decades ago. His security clearances were so deeply embedded in the system that they'd become part of the infrastructure itself, invisible and unremovable. "David," she said slowly, "pull up the personnel files for the original Apollo missions. Cross-reference with anyone who had cosmic-level security clearance during the 1980s. Call to action. We're building something special here with these incredible historical stories. If you're enjoying this journey through hidden history, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you helps us bring more amazing content to light." The files that emerged painted a picture that defied belief. Marcus Holloway, youngest flight director in NASA history, architect of guidance systems that still formed the backbone of modern space exploration, and officially dead for 35 years. But buried deeper in the classified archives was something even more stunning, a psychological profile that described him as the finest strategic mind of his generation and potentially dangerous if compromised by foreign powers. David's face had gone pale. "Director, this is insane. You're saying this old man in a nursing home is some kind of space program legend?" Before Sarah could answer, her emergency line chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The voice that emerged wasn't Marcus this time. It was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of the intelligence community. "Director Chin, this is Deputy Director Williams, Central Intelligence Agency. We're aware of your current communication with the asset codenamed Apollo. A joint NASA-CIA tactical team is en route to your location. Under no circumstances are you to terminate that communication link." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath everything she thought she understood about her career, her agency, and the hidden machinery of American power. "Sir, I need to understand. What you need to understand, Director, is that Apollo has been our most valuable strategic asset for half a century. The Artemis crisis isn't an accident, it's an attack. And unfortunately, he's the only person alive who understands the weapons being used against us." As if summoned by Williams' words, the first of 3 black SUVs pulled into Willowbrook's parking lot. Jenny Martinez watched through the facility's front windows as men in dark suits emerged, their movements carrying the practiced efficiency of professionals who existed in the shadows between official government and plausible deniability. The war for Artemis 7 was about to begin, and at its center sat an elderly man whose greatest victory would be convincing the world he was just another forgotten grandfather. The tactical team swept through Willowbrook Senior Care like a whisper of controlled violence. Lead Agent Catherine Torres had read Marcus Holloway's file during the helicopter flight from Langley, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of finding America's most classified mind trapped in a body that betrayed him daily. Room 237 had been transformed into an impromptu command center, with secure communication equipment that looked like science fiction against the faded floral wallpaper. At Mission Control, the situation had reached critical mass. Artemis 7 now showed 11 minutes of oxygen remaining, and Commander Rebecca Santos's voice crackled through deteriorating communications. Houston, we're losing cabin pressure. The viral infection is spreading to life support. If you can't get us trajectory solutions in the next 6 minutes, we're going to have to attempt emergency separation. Sarah Chen's hands shook as she gripped her headset. Emergency separation meant ejecting the crew capsule without proper navigation, a desperate gamble that had never been attempted from lunar distance. The math was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of variables, gravitational influences from 3 celestial bodies, atmospheric entry calculations that required precision measured in fractions of degrees. Apollo, please tell me you have something, Sarah whispered into her secure line. In room 237, Marcus sat surrounded by agents and equipment, but his focus was laser-sharp on the data streams flowing across multiple screens. Nurse Jenny stood in the corner, her worldview shattered as she watched the gentle old man she'd been feeding applesauce transform into something else entirely, a strategic mind operating at levels that made quantum computers look primitive. The virus isn't random, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the secure channel to mission control. Its signature bears the hallmark of Project Blackbird, a Soviet program we thought was destroyed in 1991. Someone with access to those archives is trying to destroy American deep space capabilities. Agent Torres leaned forward. Sir, can you stop it? Marcus's laugh carried no humor. Stop it? Child, I designed the countermeasures 40 years ago. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the fluidity of a master pianist, inputting commands that bypassed every security protocol NASA had developed since his supposed death. The real question is whether I can implement them before my mind betrays me again. As if summoned by his words, Marcus felt the familiar fog beginning to creep in at the edges of his consciousness. The Alzheimer's that had been held at bay by adrenaline and purpose starting to reassert itself. His hands trembled as he fought against time and his own deteriorating neural pathways. At mission control, something extraordinary began to happen. The cascading system failures that had been consuming Artemis 7 suddenly stopped. Not gradually, instantly, as if someone had thrown a switch that existed outside the normal operational framework. Warning lights shifted from red to amber, then to green, as navigation systems came online with a precision that exceeded their original specifications. This is impossible, David Park breathed, watching telemetry data reorganize itself in real time. The navigation computers are running calculations I've never seen before, algorithms that aren't in any of our databases. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what she was witnessing. Marcus wasn't just fixing the immediate crisis, he was demonstrating mastery over systems that had evolved decades beyond his time, adapting techniques he'd developed during the Cold War to technology he'd never formally studied. But the moment of triumph carried a terrible cost. On the secure channel, Marcus's voice began to waver. Sarah, I can feel it slipping away. The connections they're fading again. You need to record everything I'm about to tell you. Apollo, stay with us, Sarah pleaded. I can't, Marcus whispered, and for the first time, his voice carried the frailty of his 82 years. But I can give you something better. Authorization code Omega-7 Alpha. It will unlock every algorithm I ever created, every solution to every crisis NASA might face for the next century. Agent Torres stepped forward as Marcus slumped in his chair, his brief moment of crystal clarity giving way to the fog that had defined his recent years. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of electronics and the distant sound of Jenny Martinez crying softly in the corner. At mission control, Artemis 7's trajectory locked into a perfect Earth return path. Commander Santos's voice came through clear and strong. Houston, all systems are green. Navigation is perfect. Whatever you did down there, it worked. Sarah Chin stared at her screens, watching 4 astronauts sail safely toward home, saved by the mind of a man the world had forgotten. The irony was devastating. America's greatest space triumph in decades had been orchestrated by someone who officially didn't exist, whose sacrifices would never be acknowledged, whose genius had been hidden away like a state secret too dangerous to reveal. As the celebration began around her, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She reached for her personal phone and dialed a number in Portland, Oregon, ready to tell a son that his confused father had just saved the future of human space exploration. The call reached David Holloway at 4:23 a.m. Pacific Time, jolting him from restless sleep in his Portland home. Sarah Chen's voice carried an exhaustion that seemed to span decades as she attempted to explain the impossible. His father, the man he'd dismissed as a victim of advancing dementia, had just orchestrated the most complex space rescue in human history. "You're telling me," David said slowly, pacing his living room while his wife listened from the stairs, "that my father, the man who can't remember what he had for breakfast, just saved 4 astronauts using mathematics that don't exist in any textbook?" Sarah's response came weighted with the gravity of classified revelation. "David, your father didn't just work for NASA. He was NASA's most classified asset for 3 decades. The guidance systems that got us to the moon, the orbital mechanics that keep the International Space Station operational, the emergency protocols that have prevented dozens of disasters, they all trace back to algorithms he developed." The psychological impact hit David like a physical blow. For 35 years, he had carried the burden of believing his father was simply another ambitious man who had chosen career over family. The resentment had defined their relationship, poisoned every interaction, created a wall of hurt that neither man had known how to breach. Now, learning that Marcus had been operating in a world of secrets so deep that his very existence had been erased, David felt the foundation of his understanding crumble. At Willowbrook Senior Care, the aftermath of the mission unfolded with surreal quiet. Agent Torres sat beside Marcus's bed, watching as the man who had just demonstrated godlike mastery over orbital mechanics struggled to remember her name from one moment to the next. The cruel irony of Alzheimer's was that it preserved emotional memories while destroying factual ones. Marcus could feel the weight of his sacrifices without being able to articulate what they had been. Nurse Jenny Martinez had been sworn to secrecy under the National Security Act, but the psychological burden was crushing. She found herself studying every elderly resident with new eyes, wondering what other hidden histories might be shuffling through the facility's corridors. The man in room 314 who muttered about submarine tactics during bath time, was he another forgotten naval genius? The woman who arranged her pills with military precision, might she have once commanded classified operations? The hardest part, Jenny confided to the facility's chaplain, is knowing that all these families think their loved ones are just fading away. But what if some of them are carrying secrets that could change the world? Back at Johnson Space Center, the ripple effects of Marcus's intervention spread through NASA's organizational structure like shock waves. Deputy Director Williams arrived from Langley within hours, carrying authorization codes that unlocked digital vaults containing 50 years of Marcus's work. The algorithms and protocols he had developed weren't just brilliant, they were prophetic, anticipating technological challenges that hadn't emerged until decades after his official death. Elena Vasquez, now 78 and living under witness protection in Vermont, received a secure phone call that brought her to tears. For 35 years, she had believed that her betrayal had destroyed Marcus, that the psychological trauma she'd caused had led to his early demise. Learning that he had not only survived but had spent decades continuing to serve the country she had compromised filled her with a complex mixture of relief and devastating guilt. "He covered for me," she whispered to her CIA handler. "All these years, he could have exposed what I did, could have revealed that I was feeding information to the Soviets. Instead, he let the world believe he was broken, took responsibility for failures that were my fault." The handler's response revealed the deeper truth. "Dr. Vasquez, we've known about your cooperation with Soviet intelligence since 1984. Apollo's cover story wasn't just protecting national secrets, it was protecting you. The false records he created made it appear you were actually a double agent, feeding useless information while protecting real American capabilities." The revelation shattered Elena's understanding of her own past. For decades, she had lived with the guilt of believing she had betrayed her closest friend and damaged American security. Now she learned that Marcus had orchestrated an elaborate deception to protect both his country and the woman who had inadvertently threatened it. His mathematical genius hadn't just extended to orbital mechanics. It had encompassed human psychology, crafting a narrative that preserved national security while offering redemption to someone he refused to abandon. Saracen found herself facing a career-defining decision. NASA regulations demanded complete transparency in mission reporting, but the Artemis 7 rescue had involved classified assets and techniques that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The official record would show that the crisis was resolved through innovative problem-solving by mission control personnel, erasing Marcus's contribution from history once again. The psychological cost of this erasure weighed heavily on everyone involved. The 4 astronauts of Artemis 7 would never know that their salvation had come from a forgotten genius in a nursing home. Future space explorers would benefit from Marcus's innovations without understanding their origin. The pattern of invisible sacrifice that had defined Marcus's entire career would continue even in his moment of greatest triumph. David Holloway drove through the night from Portland to Houston, desperate to reach his father before the fog of dementia claimed him completely. The 8-hour journey gave him time to process decades of misunderstood interactions, moments when Marcus had tried to share pride in achievements he couldn't name, attempts at connection that David had dismissed as confusion. When David finally entered room 237 at Willowbrook, he found Marcus staring out the window at the pre-dawn sky, his expression carrying a lucidity that flickered like a candle in the wind. For a brief moment, father and son looked at each other with complete understanding. "I'm sorry," David whispered, the words carrying the weight of 35 years of misdirected anger. Marcus's response came with the gentle wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating impossible trajectories. "Son, love isn't about the paths we choose, it's about finding our way back to each other, no matter how far we've drifted." The reconciliation was achingly brief. Within hours, Marcus's moment of clarity faded, leaving behind the gentle confusion that had become his daily reality. But the bond between father and son had been restored, built on truth rather than the shadows of incomplete understanding that had divided them for so long. Agent Torres completed her report with professional precision, but privately struggled with the ethical implications of a system that consumed its greatest minds and discarded them when they became inconvenient. Marcus Holloway represented both the best and worst of American intelligence operations, brilliant service combined with institutional amnesia that left heroes to fade away in anonymous obscurity. The seeds of transformation had been planted, but like all meaningful change, they would require time, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about how society treats its most valuable and vulnerable members. 6 months later, the Artemis 7 crew returned to Earth as heroes, their successful mission hailed as a triumph of human ingenuity and technological prowess. Commander Rebecca Santos stood before Congress, accepting commendations for NASA's innovative crisis management, while 300 miles away, Marcus Holloway sat in Willowbrook's garden, feeding breadcrumbs to sparrows with the peaceful contentment of a man whose burdens had finally been shared. David visited every weekend now, bringing his children to meet the grandfather they'd never truly known. The conversations were simple, discussions of weather and birds and the changing seasons, but underneath flowed a current of profound connection. Marcus's memories of orbital mechanics had faded, but his capacity for love remained undiminished. Saracen kept Apollo's authorization codes in a vault beneath the Johnson Space Center, a legacy of genius that would guide humanity's reach toward the stars for generations to come. She had established a classified memorial fund for forgotten assets, ensuring that future guardians of American secrets would not be abandoned when their minds began to fail. In the end, Marcus Holloway's greatest calculation hadn't involved rockets or satellites. It had been the complex mathematics of human redemption, proving that even in our darkest orbits, we can find our way home. What incredible stories of hidden heroes might exist in your own community? Share this video with someone who appreciates tales of unsung genius. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories of the remarkable people who shaped our world from the shadows. Hit that notification bell, because history's greatest secrets are still waiting to be told.